talk about children and youth now. Okay, first off, there's no credible scientific support for the use of these drugs. I talked about the stimulants in children. There's no evidence of long-term benefits. Basically the same for the antidepressants and the neuroleptics. But 1 in 23, 3.5 million children are on the stimulants. Okay, 1 in 40 are on antidepressants. Like in this one study, the Prozac Boys study, 23% of people on antidepressants develop manic-like symptoms, 19% hostility. It used to be that the mental health system said, we are not going to diagnose children with a serious mental illness. They used to call, when I first started out in this and being on the mental health board of the Alaska Mental Health Association, they had this category called seriously emotionally disturbed youth, or children, SED. And they basically said, you know, children go through things. They have developmental stages, and we just can't know while they're children. You have to be adults until we can diagnose them. Okay, then, in order to promote drug sales, Johnson & Johnson paid this Harvard psychiatrist by the name of Joseph Biederman to do a study to prove that Risperdal helped, you know, was good for children with bipolar disorder. So he, and then I forget the other guy, really promoted this idea that children had bipolar disorder. And it really is a justification for giving them drugs. And then they would say things, it sounds absurd, but they say, the criteria, the symptoms of childhood bipolar disorder doesn't look anything like adult bipolar disorder. So basically, if you have a temper tantrum, then you get, you know, then that if someone has a temper tantrum, that gets diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And the bipolar rate soared. It went from increased, I don't really say this, but it basically increased 40-fold. In a 10-year period after Biederman and this other guy from, I think, 1995 to 2005. You know this? Have you heard this? No? That the pediatric or childhood bipolar rate went up 40 times in that time frame, from virtually none to 800,000 in 2003. So, and then all these children get put on neuroleptics and anticonvulsants and everything else. Oh, and I should have put in there, and the antidepressants. Okay, now a little over 1% are actually on the neuroleptics. I mean, even some infants, 6-month-olds, are put on. Not a huge number, but not a small number either. And these drugs are approved for psychosis. Now, you tell me what a psychotic 6-month-old looks like. We used to have a different name for it. Colic. You know, really, if you have you know, a fussy kid, then, you know, you give them Seroquel or Zyprexa and they don't fuss anymore. They can't. So that's what we're doing. I know this is hard to believe, but they're even talking about diagnosing in utero with bipolar disorder. You've heard of that, right? I mean, the idea is if the baby is kicking a lot, then they've got bipolar disorder. I kid you not. I mean, okay, so one of the results has been that the childhood mental health disability rate went from essentially 0 to 600,000 in 2007. It's very profitable. The drug companies, and so why has this happened? One is, after they penetrated the adult market with especially the neuroleptics about 20 years ago, they said, well, how can we expand our market? And they really did it in 2 places. One was children, and the other was the elderly. Have people heard about this massive drugging of the elderly with the neuroleptics? Maybe not. In nursing homes. There's a recent study last May by the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Social Services that basically said half of those prescriptions were Medicare fraud. And but the government can't do anything about it. And there's a black box warning on all the neuroleptics that say that it doubles the mortality rate for elderly people. And what happens is people, they're in the nursing home, and if they're like infants. If you give an elderly person, these neuroleptics, they're way easier to take care of. They can't get out of bed. They can't complain. And then, the children come in and say, well, what's going on? Oh, your mother is old. And then they die. Oh, your mother was old. But you hear a lot of stories about people that have been put on these drugs, and then when they're taken off of them, they come back to life. Okay, so that's the elderly. Then they also targeted children. And there are lots of financial incentives. I tend not to ascribe bad motives to people. I think people generally are trying to help. But it's getting harder and harder as all this evidence is coming out, and people aren't really doing anything about it. But there are financial incentives to give these psych drugs to poor children and youth on Medicaid. One is schools. If a child gets labeled as a special needs child, they get more money, right? Okay. Foster parents, if it's a therapeutic foster home, they get more money. And the psychiatrists, of course, that's their bread and butter. If they can make about 3 times as much money as if they have 10-minute med check sessions rather than actually trying to deal with the child in talk therapy or that kind of thing. And then poor children basically have pretty disempowered parents. I mean, one of the things that happens is that the schools will say, Johnny is being disruptive. If you don't put him on meds, we're going to throw him out of school. And if you're a poor parent, you really are not in a position to resist that very much. And even they'll say, if you don't put Johnny on meds, we're going to take him away because you're neglecting your child's medical needs. And they do take children away if the parents don't drug them. So parents are very disempowered, and once they've gotten put in foster care, God help them, because the parents have really been taken out of the picture. And while technically they might have the right, in Alaska, for example, you can't give psych drugs to a child, even in foster care, if the parent doesn't agree to it, unless their parental rights have been terminated. But the reality is that, they coerce them. Well, if you ever want to get your child back, you got to agree to this kind of thing. And I've even heard of them. I know a parent who said that her signature was forged. Okay. So that's what's going on. And I maybe should have put it in terms of the harm that's being done by the drugs in children and the lack of efficacy. This website, criticalthinkrx.org, goes through the research. It's in a PowerPoint format, and it was funded by a settlement of the fraudulent marketing of Neurontin. The Attorney General, they had a fund set up to do certain research and education, and one of the grants was to put together this. It's very well documented scientifically. So I'm not really talking about this evidence of the harm, but if you go there, they have this curriculum, and you can actually get certified in it.